Dr. Freud. All right, to start, I'd just like to thank a few people, Dr. McCrae, my advisor for this presentation, and the Interdisciplinary Studies Department. I see Stephen right here, Patricia right there, and Jim back there, and then Carrie Sauter, who helped me with my degree. And they have all just helped immensely with this project. And then the Humanities Department, Humanities Program, Dr. Philip Singh and Dr. Michelle Ashro, who forced me to go on this study abroad trip to Japan. All right, so I'm Alyson Becker, and my Interdisciplinary Studies degree is Intercultural Communication and East Asian Studies. And I hope you enjoyed my presentation, The Earthquake That Shook the World, Cultural Differences and Media Presentation of the Tohoku Disaster. Now, we've all been getting asked the questions today, so I want to ask you, the audience, a quick question. These are two stills from a pretty popular movie. Can anybody tell me what movie these are from?
Day After Tomorrow?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't seen it myself. These types of things terrify me, Alina. But these are stills from The Day After Tomorrow, a movie that was directed by Roland Emmerich, who directed Independence Day. It was released in May of '04. And some numbers, it grossed hundreds of millions of dollars in the box office and even more with DVD sales. Now, these are two images that look a little similar to the movie images you saw a second ago. However, these are stills from helicopter footage of the Tohoku disaster. These shots were directed by the Associated Press, which is notably an American company, released on March 11th, 2011. And a few numbers for you. This was a 9.0 magnitude earthquake that hit at 2:46 p.m. Japan Standard Time. There were waves up to 133 feet that traveled up to 6 miles inland. And this earthquake moved Honshu, which is Japan's main island, what we think of when we imagine Japan, 8 feet east, and rotated the earth 4 to 10 inches on its axis. On the first day, 16,000 people died, 27,000 people were injured, and 3,000 went missing. Now, interestingly enough, I had been waiting to go to Japan for several years, and this disaster happened 2 weeks before I was scheduled to leave. However, I went to Japan, and after I got there, I noticed a difference in the mood and the reactions to this disaster. Here in America, before I had got on my 20-hour flight, people were telling me not to go. Very vehement, very just looking out for my safety. However, I got to Japan, and the mood was much calmer, much more relaxed. But this was the country that had been hit. So, in essence, this capstone project happened to me. I didn't really choose it. I really wanted to know what was going on here. So I chose to look at it from the perspective of media and media exposure. Here in America, we knew about this disaster because of things we saw on television, or read online, or read in the newspapers. And where I went in Japan, which this clicker, is there a clicker?
Yeah, press this side. Arrow.
I'll just point. So where I went in Japan was down where it says Japan, to the left and down a little bit. Approximately 500 miles south of Sendai, where the earthquake happened, and about 250 miles south of Tokyo. So again, an area that relied on media coverage. So then I thought, I wonder if there's a connection here. And using multiple disciplines and integrative analyses, I have attempted to make a connection between the two. So my methodology for this project began with a cultural literature review. Fritz Gaensland, in his article, Culture and Decision Making in China, Japan, Russia, and the United States, notes that a cultural analysis is crucial in situations characterized by complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And then I furthered my literature review with an analysis of media theorists and how individuals react with the media they watch and experience. Moreover, I conducted a media analysis using 5 clips broadcast within the first few days of the disaster on American television from a variety of networks, and then 4 clips from the same in Japan. Lastly, I utilized ethnographic data, which is what made me begin this project in the first place, what I saw here in America versus what I saw in Japan. Now, for interdisciplinary studies, of course, we use multiple disciplines to explain something. The disciplines I have used here are media and communication studies. And two prominent theorists that I looked at were Marshall McLuhan. Every media theorist knows this guy. He wrote "The medium is the message," and basically says that what we watch and what we see on television becomes what we experience. That our nerves and our nervous system are like wires that come out of television and electronic media. And then also another media theorist I looked at was Susan Sontag, who wrote "Regarding the Pain of Others," and she asserts that Westerners have an almost voyeuristic tendency when it comes to disasters or situations where others are in pain. We like to watch, we like to turn away, we get pride in flinching at something horrible, and we get pride at being able to withstand something that is destructive. And quickly, for anthropology, I looked at Harry Triandis, who wrote "Individualism and Collectivism," and he analyzes the differences between these two and how individualism occurs more often in Western countries where the individual is responsible for his or her success, and then collectivism, which occurs in Eastern countries where the group is responsible for success. And then lastly, I briefly looked at history and philosophy as a background for culture. For example, in Western cultures, Christianity is very prominent, and something unique to Christianity is this process of salvation, individual good deeds. And then, on the contrary, Confucianism in Eastern cultures relies on filial piety. What can we do for our family, and how do we interact within the group? Now briefly, I'm going to go over these integrative strategies that I use to kind of meld these disciplines together. Matthew Miller and Veronica Boytsman-Sia worked at Harvard on something called Project Zero, where they came up with several strategies to integrate disciplines, two of which I use here. One of them is building complex and multi-causal explanations, where you use a variety of findings from various disciplines, which I listed before, to explain a phenomenon, which is this disaster. I also utilized compound concepts, an example of which is something like bioethics. We hear these every day. And then Alan Repko, who wrote Interdisciplinary Research, also listed several strategies, and I utilized organization, where you take your findings and organize them spatially in order to show a relationship. And this was a diagram that I took from John Tomlinson's book, Globalization and Culture, and it analyzes culture in relation to media and asserts that it's something cyclical. Culture's lived experience is made up of everything that I researched with history and philosophy, everything that makes up our sets and values that we live by day to day. This is culture's lived experience. Then through mediation, it becomes media, culture's representation. We see these things reflected back at us from what we watch on television. And then when these are reflected back at us, we internalize them again, and it becomes culture's lived experience yet once more. For a quick visualization, this is a road crew in Japan fixing up a damaged road right after the earthquake. And they reacted to this based on the Japanese values of group harmony, preparedness, and group effort. And then this was broadcast, something like this was broadcast to citizens in Japan watching. They then internalized it and reacted similarly. They saw that this was what was happening, then they would come together in group harmony, and this becomes the lived experience, the resilience and the calm that I witnessed. And this is a chart that I created based off of Repko's organization. The red are Japanese clips, and the black are American clips. It's an XY graph, and the x-axis goes from realism on one end to sensationalism on the other end. And the y-axis goes from emphasis on the individual to emphasis on the group. And as you can see, a lot of the Japanese clips are in the realistic and group-oriented quadrant, and a lot of the American clips are in the individual-oriented and sensationalist quadrant. And a few that I wanted to point out. I wish I could work this clicker. But Asahi is the red one to the furthest to the left on the realistic scale. I was a little uncomfortable watching this clip because there was no sound. It was merely somebody holding a camera on the ground, watching the water flow toward them and watching cars move in the water right by them. It was very realistic. There wasn't much emphasis on the group or on the individual either way because of how silent it was, but you saw what was happening on the ground as it happened. And then, of course, Fox. I looked at 2 clips from Fox, and very, very sensationalized and very focused on the individual were these clips. Sensationalized means that it was very much like a movie. What I saw were big helicopter shots of water coming through towns and knocking over buildings and cascading into streets, something that you would see in The Day After Tomorrow, eerily similar. And then this is an example of something that you would hear in most of these American clips, but again, this is taken from Fox. Hundreds of bodies found in Japan after a massive tsunami spawned by an earthquake. This in and of itself is very sensational. A lot of the fear rhetoric that Fox usually gets a lot of flack for is evident here, and this is from March 11th, 2011. And then, my American experience as a result of things like this was that a lot of people had in mind something very movie-esque. If you go to Japan, you're going to get a second head. If you go to Japan, you're going to get a third arm. You shouldn't go. You really shouldn't go. They had this image of an entire country being swept under this water from the tsunami, when really it was just one region. And this is an image from Sendai, 2 days after the initial disaster. It's a group of people lining up at a local elementary school for drinking water. And I believe this is evident of a lot of the realism that was seen in the television broadcasts. The people knew what to expect. It wasn't a stampede. They lined up very orderly. And then collectivist elements were also present here. Teamwork, harmony, preparedness, everything can be evident right here. And I also, when I went to Japan, I had to undergo disaster orientation upon my arrival. And I received this booklet. And prominently, I'm going to read you 2 very quick bits: join forces for first aid and join forces for rescue. This was a common theme. I was told that because I was able-bodied and healthy, that if anything were to happen, I could not run away. I had to stay behind and help the others. It would be my duty to help those who could not move as easily as I could. And so, in conclusion, and kind of melding Tomlinson's original diagram with what I found and depicted on my organizational chart, you will note that the values are different between these 2 cultures, and that the media may have gone global, which is evident in a lot of economic or political discourse, but culture cannot be forgotten because it really affects how people act and how disasters may be handled in different countries. My compound concept, as a result, is cultural media, and I believe this is more indicative of reality than global media. It's the mediation cycle as it occurred with the results depicted on this graph and the differing responses that I saw in each country. And then, as a quick closing note, despite all of this buildup I had prior to my departure, I get back to America in August, and within the first few days of my return, I'm sitting on my couch in Maryland doing nothing, and I feel my first earthquake. So, thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'll do my best.